Hello, everyone. As we all start filing in, we're going to be starting in just about a minute or two so that we can let everyone get joined, and we'll be talking to you real soon. So everyone who just joined, thanks for joining. We're just going to give it about one more minute as we let some more people file in. So we'll be talking to you in just a moment. All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar, CI/CD for a Cloud Native World. We have a lot to get through today. I just want to let you know a few things up top. One, we are recording. So if you need to leave early or perhaps you have a colleague who's unable to join, they will be able to view this later on. Two, we will have time at the end for questions. So please, as soon as you think of a question, go ahead, right ahead and put it into the Q&A. Even if you think maybe we'll answer that later. We'd just like to know what people are thinking and wanting to know more about. So please go right ahead and ask right away. Before we get started, can we go on to the next slide, please? I'd like to introduce our speakers. I have them all say a little bit about themselves. So let's start with, from RedMonk, we have Kellyanne Fitzpatrick joining us. Kellyanne, would you like to say a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, Kelly Fitzpatrick, analyst with RedMonk. We are a developer-focused analyst firm. Prior to my time at RedMonk, I've done a lot of things. I've taught at universities. I have worked as a QA analyst, test release manager, and a tech writer. And I'm really excited to be here today.
All right, thank you very much. We also have Kristen Basket from CloudBees. Kristen, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, good morning all. Hi, Kristen Basket. I'm a solutions marketing manager here at CloudBees. I have Jenkins X as part of my portfolio. I've had a number of products here at CloudBees, in addition to working on some infrastructure and event management in a prior life at BMC. So I've kind of got the dev and the ops side of the house.
All right, and our last speaker for today is going to be Oscar Medina, also from CloudBees. Oscar, would you like to say a few words?
Yes, thank you, Max. Hi, everyone. Oscar Medina. I'm a developer advocate for Jenkins X, the open source project. I have experience dating back probably 20-something years in the IT industry, and I've seen it evolve quite a bit. I think cloud native is definitely something that will be around for a while, and so I'm excited to talk to you about how that maps to capabilities of Jenkins X.
All right. So without further ado, we should just get this started so that we can get through everything. So let's pass it over to Kellyanne, our first speaker.
Sure. So we're here today to talk about CI/CD for a cloud native world. That's continuous integration and continuous delivery for those of you who are not up on all the acronyms. But I'd like to start first with this concept of change and changes kind of more broadly. In some respects, change is what tech is about. It's about what we can build to, among other objectives, make the world better. Appetite for change is often what draws people to tech, and I, for one, am here because whatever else I've experienced in the software industry, there's always been something new to learn, some way of adapting, and I am absolutely never bored. In addition, software itself is built through changes in design, changes in configuration, changes in code. CI/CD is about how a change, whether a new feature or a bug fix or any other type of change you can think of, how it goes from it works on my machine to it works in production to how can we observe what is happening in production to improve upon what we have. Today, we'll also be talking about changes in how we build and distribute software. In particular, what changes we've seen in areas like process and architecture and delivery and so on, that have gotten us to this cloud native world. But first, I'd like to start with some changes in how we've been consuming software, because kind of the elephant in the room, if you will, these days is that a lot of us have had to change the way that we work and the way we kind of go about our lives, dealing with this kind of ongoing pandemic. And what you see in front of you right now is a Twitter card from an article in the New York Times from a few weeks ago, talking about how the current pandemic has changed the way we internet, and they actually use internet as a verb, which I really like. And the article itself just compares different trends within software categories. But this chart itself, which I wager is not to scale, really interested me, and we could probably talk about this for an hour in and of itself if we really wanted to. And what interests me here is not necessarily the ESPN.com trend, although I wager a lot of us do miss sports. But I'd like to focus on both Netflix and Zoom. Netflix, first of all, many of you know it as a streaming entertainment service and probably are not surprised that usage has gone up recently, being that many of us are at home. But for those of you who were not around for Netflix's earlier days, it's an example of how delivery methods have changed. Netflix began as an alternative to kind of mortar and brick video stores, and initially worked by transporting DVDs to users through the mail, and users would send them back. But then they moved on into streaming, and then into content creation and even content curation. And when we talk about continuous delivery, Netflix is, of course, notable for its kind of Spinnaker project, amongst other things. So Netflix itself being an example of kind of change in how things can be both produced and delivered. And then, of course, we have Zoom. For many of us, conferencing software has become increasingly important in these past few months, replacing either in-person team meetings, client meetings. Our kids are using it for school. Distributed family and friends are using conferencing software for everything from remote birthday parties to happy hour. And we are speaking to you today from a Zoom webinar platform rather than at an in-person event. So definitely something a lot of us are becoming more familiar with. However, Zoom in particular is probably of note because as usage of the app is up and so many different types of users have adopted it, there's also been an increase in the discovery of security vulnerabilities and avenues of easy abuse. So among other things that we've had emerge in the past couple weeks and months is the term Zoom bombing, which was certainly not a common term that I knew of a few months ago. So for a company like Zoom and technology like that, what we are seeing is a rethinking of two concepts that will not be strange to anybody who has done software development, and that is velocity and quality. So think of Zoom as something which definitely has had to pay more attention to quality and velocity, both in that it has had to kind of get changes out very, very quickly to address some of the concerns that folks have. And whereas we often think of velocity and innovation, it's just a sign that quality is something that is also of import. And while these two may seem kind of diametrically opposed, studies show that that is not the case. And in fact, in a bit, Kristen is going to tell us a little bit about the DevOps Research and Assessment State of DevOps report, and the idea, the discovery, the conclusion that organizations that are identified as high performers often achieve quality because of the ability to move fast and not in spite of it. And this ability to balance both quality and velocity is at heart one of the things that CI/CD is about. And CI/CD is integral to achieving that kind of balance, especially, to my mind, as someone who is a former, QA person and a test and release manager, through various types of testing that kind of go along with CI/CD. And we'll talk a bit about some of them today. But first, I'd like to talk a bit more about some of the changes that we see in the way that software is built in terms of process. For instance, Agile. So a shift that has landed us where we are today in terms of software development, especially the shift from waterfall to something like Agile. resulting in the breakdown of, kind of like dev and test silos, more iterative developments, cycles, and the advent of, extreme programming and kind of cross-functional teams. Agile itself is 20 years old. Not everyone, has been using it. But another kind of way of doing software development that we've seen, of course, is DevOps, which you've already heard me mention that term, talking about the DevOps research and assessment, kind of group. DevOps itself is 10 years old. The term was coined over 10 years ago. And among other things, marks a shift left in operations, is calling for these kind of smaller cross-functional teams, calls for greater communication, greater collaboration, and a very user-centered approach to software development. In addition to some of these changes that we're seeing in processes and methodologies for developing software, we're seeing software itself kind of change and what we're actually building. And what you see here, this idea of this movement from monoliths to microservices, probably something many of you have heard. The idea of breaking down these larger apps into smaller pieces that make them, kind of easier to decide who's in charge of what. But of course, because this is tech, there is also a backlash to that the pendulum does swing the other way. And very recently, we've heard this term kind of macroservices pop up, coming surprisingly from Uber. And what you see in front of you now is kind of a map of Uber microservices. I love the kind of two services off on the left that are just talking to each other. But as you can imagine, this is a very complicated and complex system, to test and to worry about, in certain ways. So Uber specifically has, come out talking about how they're moving to something, called macroservices to kind of reduce some of the complexity that comes along with that type of, testing. In addition to the changing of things, breaking down of services, we've heard this term, kind of cloud native, which many of you must have heard by now. Interestingly, if you ask devs who have been in the industry for a while what cloud native is, some of them will immediately tell you that it is a marketing term. Others will go to the 12-factor apps, the idea of kind of 12-factor apps coming out of Heroku, which is a very opinionated view of how developers should build and distribute apps. But also, and increasingly, what people kind of think of when they hear cloud native, these days, is containers, and along with that, of course, container orchestration. With this comes a move towards, immutable architecture, towards the promise that what I can spin up on my dev environment is going to be, the same as it's going to be on the production environment, and that it works on my machine issue is going to be kind of over and gone and done with, and is now a problem of the past. So along with all of these different changes in how we're building apps and how we're architecting apps, and the emergence of, kind of cloud native, this cloud native world, we're also seeing the adaptation of things like, continuous delivery to adapt to these changes and to take advantage of them. And one concept that we've seen emerge and have helped emerge is this concept of progressive delivery. The idea that CI/CD itself needs to kind of emerge and change. And my colleague, James Governor, has actually kind of helped coin this term and speaks about it extensively. In short, progressive delivery is what we are calling these kind of new routing approaches that are taking advantage of all these new capabilities. And it includes things like A/B testing. Testing is not always about has something broken or will it break, but to kind of put a couple things forward and to see, which users, actually like better. Also things like blue-green deployments, having, two similar environments, one with changes and one without, out, and slowly cutting traffic over to, the new version once you're convinced that there are no breaking changes. Canary deployments, the idea that you can kind of get changes out to a small group of users to kind of, see how that's going, and if there are any kind of breaking changes that you can discover, from that small group of users, dealing with those changes. So along with these types of concepts that we associate with progressive delivery, other things that we're seeing, other developments we're seeing in this cloud native world is an increased appetite for abstraction. The idea that with all of this complexity comes especially for app developers, the desire to not have to deal with that complexity, but to take advantage of all of the benefits that that complexity offers. So this gives us to things like, serverless, which initially started out with something like functions as a service. AWS Lambda is something probably you may be familiar with. But as my colleague Rachel Stevens has noted, we're increasingly seeing the concept of serverless kind of being extended to refer to fully managed services that can scale to zero, and that from the developer point of view really does not require them to worry about infrastructure at all. In addition to this kind of appetite for abstraction, we're seeing the rise of the developer and the rise of the practitioner more broadly. So if you're talking about, DevOps, you've got, operations expertise in there. And if you're talking about user-centric approaches, you're talking about, designers and people who specialize in usability. So the rise of the practitioner and emphasis on preference for, kind of like self-service, being able to try things out and see what they like. And an appetite for open source software. And a couple other things that I'll just kind of touch on because I know that Oscar will return to some of these in a bit. The emergence of configuration as code, right? Changes in how we develop software on the operations side, of things, treating that as in the same way with the same processes that we're looking at code. GitOps, a term that Alexis Richardson at Waveworks came up with. That I know Oscar is going to kind of talk about in a bit, and observability. So what happens when we bring together things that include but are not limited to monitoring, distributed tracing, and logs, being able to look at our systems once they are in production and learn from that in ways that help us build and deliver better software. In addition, we've also seen the rise of, of course, new foundations to manage new open source projects. One of the new foundations that kind of has emerged, fairly recently is the Continuous Delivery Foundation. And CloudBees especially has played, a huge role in that, donating projects such as Jenkins and Jenkins X, along with other organizations such as Netflix and Google, with the kind of donation of like Spinnaker and Tecton. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Kristen, who's going to actually, take us through a closer look at Jenkins and Jenkins X.
Kristen, I believe you're muted currently.
Can you hear me now? Sorry about that, guys.
You sure can, yep.
Welcome
Awesome.
back.
Thank you. Thanks, Kellyanne. I think understanding the evolution of the cloud native application development landscape and all of these CI/CD trends that you went over is really a perfect introduction to Jenkins X. So a little bit about Jenkins X. It's a project that's about 2 years old. It is open source and kind of incepted here at CloudBees. And when we first started, we went to the best practices that are established here in the industry. And we of course looked back at Jenkins. And what we know about Jenkins is that it's really helped establish CI and a methodology to follow. But it's been 15 years and there's a lot of research in this space since then. And Dora has helped define what a lot of that looks like and what the elite performers in this space do. So what we decided to do with Jenkins X is to productize those best practices. Martin Fowler wrote that continuous delivery is a development discipline where you build software in such a way that the software can be released into production at any time. That was more than 6 years ago now, but for a lot of us, it feels like the way that it should always have been done. It just makes a whole lot of sense. But it wasn't until Dora came along, the Dora research was conducted, that these benefits of continuous delivery were actually quantified. Until this research, we had a really hard time convincing the business of what developers already knew, which is that continuous delivery creates better software faster. And Dr. Nicole Forsgren, Jez Humble, and Gene Kim, who were the authors of Accelerate, which draws very heavily on this Dora research, that Dr. Nicole Forsgren was heading up at the time recommends several very specific DevOps practices, things like version control for all artifacts, automated deployments, trunk-based development, empowering these agile teams, continuous integration, continuous delivery, a lot of the things that Kellyanne was talking about, and much more. And you can see why we do it, right? So on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see that these elite performers that undertake these best practices have a huge advantage. 208 times more code deployments. They're recovering from incidents a lot faster, 2,604 times faster, in fact. They go from commit to deploy 106 times faster. These are like astronomical statistics. And what we want to do is to take all of these best practices that are resulting in these fantastic gains for people and package them up so that we can all build better software faster. So why not build that in Jenkins? That was kind of our first stab at it. And, everyone knows Jenkins, they love Jenkins. There's things that Jenkins continues today to do very, very well. They have this great plugin ecosystem that people love. But when we talk to end users, there are things that Jenkins wasn't doing so great in this new world. The world's changed and Jenkins continues to be really good for existing applications. But the interesting challenge for us has been, how do we continuously evolve and improve our tools and products with those best practices in mind? How do those best practices change or remain the same in the context of this cloud native world where Kubernetes is king? And so there's a lot of new technologies out there. There's a whole lot of new paradigms, as Kelly said. There's this huge shift from monoliths to microservices, and CI/CD has got to change. And what we see over and over is that folks feel there's this need for something new, something optimized for this new world of cloud native development. And when we originally thought about how to do application development in this new way, we adapted our existing tooling. We do what everyone else does, right? And that was the obvious thing to do. We had something that was in place, it was working, why change it? And this approach, this adaptation of existing tooling worked well for our existing applications that didn't change much, things we didn't refactor, things we didn't re-architect. Maybe you did a lift and shift to the cloud, but it didn't fundamentally alter the way that the application itself worked. So we didn't ultimately change the way that we were working either. So old way, these tools, it worked okay. But what about the new applications where we wanted to take advantage of new and different technology stacks and all of these best practices that we talked about through Dora and the Accelerate principles? The rise of this cloud native development ecosystem and microservices and Kubernetes, all of these things has fundamentally changed the software development industry. Imposing old workflows and the existing CI/CD tooling that we had, even though it's great, even though we love it, onto the new way of working was actually pretty limiting for us. The world had changed, and so we felt the need to evolve too. And we thought, maybe naively, that everything would be easier with this new cloud native landscape and microservices. But like Kellyanne showed, remember that picture of microservices with dots everywhere? It can actually make things harder. And this is true of the rest of the technical landscape too. With this new opportunity comes new and exciting complexity. It's great that Kubernetes lets you build Google scale applications, but this ecosystem changes really rapidly. The new world is awesome, but we need tools that help us structure it and make sense of it, and impose some usability onto that complexity. So Kubernetes is going to save the day, right? Kubernetes can fix all of our problems. So why not build out our traditional CI/CD platform for Kubernetes? We were promised like this game-changing progress, but all we got when we did that was additional complexity. I think we all know that Kubernetes it's hard to manage, and it could be easier. It's not about rejecting the new paradigm in this new world, but we need to embrace it. We knew that there's potential in these new tools, but we hadn't fully unlocked that potential yet. And like any technology, Kubernetes has its advantages. There's a reason that people want to use it. But if only everyone could be a Kubernetes expert, right? And we all know that that's very unrealistic. And it's not just that, it's also very needed. It would be the wrong solution. So what's the right solution? That's what everybody here is here to learn, right? So what we really needed was an opinionated solution that helps abstract away the technology from the benefits. And early days made it very clear to us that Kubernetes skill sets are rare. They're becoming more prevalent, but they continue to be difficult to hire for. And it doesn't make sense that everybody becomes a Kubernetes expert. And what's needed is a tool that gives you the Kubernetes benefits without the complexity. So we need to simplify it. We need to remove the obstacles that prevent us from doing our work. We need to simplify cloud native development, and that's why we created Jenkins X. So, it's this idea that Kubernetes provides the infrastructure and Jenkins X gives you an opinionated and simplified developer experience on top of that. So you get the power of Kubernetes and the ability to accelerate your CD efforts without all this overwhelming complexity. And that's going to allow you to focus on building new applications, differentiating capabilities and features, creating more value for customers, and kind of, as we say at CloudBees, build stuff that matters, right? So that's the whole goal here. So with that, I'm going to hand the presentation off to Oscar, and he'll talk about all the goodness inside Jenkins X and how you guys can take advantage of that for your evolving cloud native landscape. So over to you, Oscar.
Yeah, thank you, Kristen. Let me share my screen here. So let's see if we can get this. So the first thing I want to do is walk you through some key features that are aligned with the practices that Kelly and Kristen just mentioned, right? A few of the things that I want to cover and actually demo to you are GitOps in the configuration as code with Jenkins X, as well as how easy it is to use it and how it abstracts you from the Kubernetes complexities. In other words, you don't need to know Kubernetes. You can, and then you can modify things because Jenkins X platform is extensible. So let's walk through all of these things, and then I'll demo some of this stuff for you. So the first thing I want to clarify is that many people see Jenkins X and Jenkins, and they think it's sort of a sub-project or anything else like that, related projects. The truth is that they are just sort of spiritual counterparts, right? The only thing in my mind that stands out as a common factor is the pipeline concept, right? There is no code that's been ported to Jenkins X from Jenkins. It is an entirely different architecture. I think when Jenkins was created, microservices didn't even exist, right? So it's solving different problems in different ways for different architectures, modern architectures. Now, one of the most exciting things that I can tell you about Jenkins X is that at the heart of the execution, the pipeline execution engine is Tekton. Tekton being a Google-sponsored project, as well as one project that's in the CD Foundation, which Jenkins X is also a part of, right? And so it's becoming a standard across the industry, and Jenkins X saw that, so the core team decided to make it the de facto pipeline engine. Now, you may be thinking, well, we've got Jenkins and Jenkins X. Can I use one or the other? The truth is, there's never going to be a situation where you go all in one or the other. Your enterprise is different from everybody else's. You may have legacy applications that call for sticking with Jenkins, and so be it. But there will be a lot of opportunities for greenfield projects and anything else that might just make sense to deploy and manage via Jenkins X, right? So you don't have to have one or the other. Now, here are some of the highlights on feature sets of Jenkins X that I really like. For one thing, it sticks to the concept of GitOps. You know, Kelly mentioned it, as well as Kristen. That's a practice that actually is quite relevant in the cloud native world these days. And so we abide by that. We also do trunk-based development in Jenkins X, and we consider it an end-to-end CI/CD platform, much like Spinnaker and whatnot. So when we think of GitOps, you know, for me is, if everything is in source control and that's the single source of the truth, then we are doing it right. And changes to the configuration of Jenkins X, by the way, are managed by GitOps, meaning if you want to change the configuration of your environment, it goes through a PR or a pull request in GitHub. And that's actually, you know, we're leading by example. It also helps when you do this, because then you can easily recover from a disaster, right? Everything is in source control. Another great feature that I enjoy using is ChatOps. So ChatOps is really brought to us by other open source frameworks and libraries, such as Prow and Lighthouse. Now, Prow has other components like Tide and Hook and whatnot. And we started the Jenkins X project using Prow. However, we saw a limitation in that it only handled GitHub. And so we wanted to extend that capability into Bitbucket and other prominent Git providers. And so you'll see that Jenkins X actually uses, you can configure it to use Lighthouse if you need to use another Git provider other than GitHub. The screenshot on the right shows you a little bit of what that looks like. And I think at the very top, you can see there's a preview environment. So that's kind of the next, I'll show you what that looks like, but I'll talk about it as well. And the preview environments just help you understand what the future looks like. And as a developer, if I'm checking in my code, I like, you know, project managers or designers to see the changes. The preview environment is that dynamic environment that gets provisioned, and immediately they're able to see that. Now, going back to just overall the end-to-end CI/CD platform concept, the reason we feel Jenkins X is that, you know, there are a few things that have changed, right? With Jenkins X, you have easily readable and the ability to author pipelines in declarative language like YAML. And so the other great thing, you know, if you're an executive, you're a CTO, you're a manager, you're thinking cost and cutting cost in the cloud. With Jenkins, you have static masters that run 24/7. With Jenkins X, almost everything is ephemeral, meaning the pipelines run and the pods in Kubernetes get destroyed. So you never have to pay more than that. You run the job, you destroy the resources, it is done, right? We have different pipelines in place. There's the pull request pipeline, there's the release pipelines, and all of these can be modified to fit your needs. You can override steps in the pipelines and make it yours, right? Much like the traditional Jenkins Groovy-based pipelines, right? Another concept that we have is called build packs. So with Jenkins X, you can actually quickly kick the tires without having to import an existing application or write any code. All of that is done because we have pipelines for every language out there that's prominent, you know, Python, Node, Gradle, Ruby, Maven. All of that you can quickly test without having to import your own application, right? And you can extend it. You can have your corporate level build packs that are private and tell Jenkins X, I just want to use the approved sanctioned pipelines build packs and nothing public. You can do this kind of configuration with Jenkins X. Now, another thing that, you know, just thinking about the introduction of our webinar, and we talk about agility and collaboration, as well as just overall progressive delivery and you know, scaling services up and down. Jenkins X gives you the ability to have applications deployed, but if there is no traffic to your application, then you don't have to pay for that bandwidth in the cloud, right? It scales down, and that's out of the box capability as of today, right? Serverless deployments using Knative to be more specific. Another thing that was mentioned earlier today, I'm really excited about, I actually have a workshop on this, is the canary deployments. And again, we sort of put a whole bunch of frameworks, open source frameworks together to build Jenkins X. You can also plug in other open source, such as Istio and Flagger. Now, we achieve canary deployment capabilities using these open source tools, and all you have to do is specify a few things in your YAML app configuration, and off you go into deploying a percentage of a new feature to, or a new feature to a percentage of your audience, like whatever that may be. And again, preview environments give you that visibility that no developer, at least I have not seen this in the 22 plus years I've been in the industry, that you work isolated and all the work, you're reviewing it on your own and whatnot. You're most likely part of a team, which means, you know, project managers, product managers, designers, and other folks in your team may want to see what your changes look like. And that's what preview environments give you in Jenkins X. You have the automated process of creating these preview environments. It all happens, and it's triggered by Prow, as I mentioned earlier, or Lighthouse. And that works in conjunction with webhooks. In this case, you know, I've been using GitHub. So that is sort of how the architecture works. And in the end, people get a link to a preview environment that everyone can see and have consensus. So you can actually, as part of your developer workflow, have someone approve the change via a comment in GitHub, or say it needs work, right? All of that workflow is done and kept. There's traceability, all via GitHub comments. So the big question is, that should you be using Kubernetes? Well, if you are using microservices, the likelihood you'll need something like Jenkins X is very high, right? There are several paid for services and whatnot, but Jenkins X is open source, so it doesn't cost you. You're literally just paying for compute time and cloud bandwidth and whatnot. Right, and we support, at the moment, Jenkins X is first-class citizen in GKE and EKS. So you can, if you're in AWS or Google Cloud, you're all set. You just, you can deploy the platform easily. So now it's time for the big demo. And I know that GitHub was down earlier today. I think based on information I just got is actually back up. So we get the opportunity to show you some good stuff related to the different concepts and practices that we just talked about. So let me go ahead and switch back over to my terminal. Hopefully you're seeing that. And what I have here, what I want to demo today is I have an application. I have an application called Ski App. And in the staging environment, I have the 0.7.1 version deployed. In the production environment, I have the 0.6.9 deployed. Both are easily accessible. If I just click on one URL, hang on one second. I should be able to see it. I might have to, there we go. So there is the staging environment, right? There's a typo in the global navigation. So the use case is, hey, you know what? We need to fix the global navigation today. Let's put that through, let's have a developer fix that and put the app through CI/CD and then deploy that to staging as well as production. But before that, we'll get a preview environment to be able to see the change. So let's go through that process right now, right? So I'm in the application. I have a cloned version of it. I have a custom, or I should say a branch in GitHub that's called homepage change. Now I'm just going, as a developer, going to fix that change by removing the extra D. I'm going to save it. Now I'm going to add my changes. And I'm just going to say fixing global nav. Now I'm going to push my changes. And this has not triggered anything, right? This is your typical workflow. We need a PR at this point. This just sent it over. So let's go ahead and do browse to the application. And what you'll see is the typical, PR alert on GitHub. And yeah, there's a change. So I want to initiate a PR. I'll leave it as is. You can always add more detail, of course. That's probably a bit best practice. For now, I'll just go ahead and hit that. And what this is doing is creating a pull request. And notice how Jenkins X bot immediately just halted things and say, well, yeah, you made a change, but things are not approved. So I'm just going to run this through the lifecycle and run a pipeline. And using Prow, of course, as you can see, Tide is there, the PR build. So that's the pull request build that's about to be triggered. It will be triggered in a second. I think we should be okay in terms of this demo today because GitHub is up and running. Let me just double check. Yep, so they're good. And here's our staging environment. Like I said, you see the typo. So what we're going to do is that's going to trigger the execution of the pipeline to create the preview environment. And so that's what we want to see. We want to see and show everybody else the change, right? So as that is happening, I can actually walk you through what that looks like. If in Jenkins X, you can monitor activities of pipelines for a given application, in this case, I'm going to say, hey, I want to check the logs for the ski app, see what's going on, and just kind of do like a tail in Unix where I can see the different steps that are happening for my app. Now you notice how there's a lot of steps that happened already and some are running. We want to wait till that happens. And the whole concept of GitOps is what I want to show you here. We're actually going to eventually create a pull request into the application itself, but also in the staging environment. So we're going to monitor the staging environment repository for changes as well, okay? And that's going to happen on the right side. For now, we're not quite ready for that yet, because what I want to show you now is we just generated a preview environment automatically for the typo fix on the global nav. So when I click on this, I should be able to see it, and there it is. Very nice, right? So what I want to do now is my preview environment looks good. The typical workflow is here it is. You see people actually can click on that. And again, Prow allows you to do an approval right from a comment in GitHub. So I'm going to say, yeah, I approve that. Now, what this is going to do, now you see the label or tag approved. It's going to trigger another pipeline. And that pipeline is going to be the release pipeline into our staging environment, right? Because we haven't actually deployed that. So what I want to do is start monitoring our our preview or staging environment, apologies for that. Now, you can monitor the activities of different pipelines in Jenkins X. Automatically, Jenkins X will create pipelines for the different environment repositories. In this case, we're monitoring, or we're going to monitor, the staging environment for changes. Again, this is all GitOps, right? We're talking about doing a pull request. The source of the truth is source control. We can roll back and whatnot. So what's happening on the left side here is we're saying, okay, we are making a change and we're deploying the global nav change into the staging environment. So we're seeing that execution of the pipeline in Jenkins X. One of the things while this executes, I'd like to mention is that you don't need to know Helm, Helm being another sort of de facto application package management software that we use, so that you don't have to create it yourself. Jenkins X creates your Helm charts for your application that you import automatically. And this just goes along with the thought of abstraction from complexity. Now, if you do know Helm and you wish to actually dabble with modifying the Helm chart for your application in Jenkins X, you are free to do so. We don't actually prevent any of that, right? We're simply creating it up front for you, where you can actually tweak the settings and the YAML for your Helm chart. So as you can see, we're still executing this change. There is going to be a pull request in the staging environment. So soon on the right side, we should see some activity when the pull request starts kicking in the staging environment. It's number 5. So technically I can click on this and visually see that change in the environment repository, right? The bot is taking action. You can see the version of the application that will be deployed into staging is now 72, and the pipeline is executing. All looks good. It looks like the promotion build is pending. So as soon as that happens, we should be seeing some activity on the right side. And that's because we're monitoring the activity and configuration changes for the staging environment. So let's see that happen shortly. There it is. On the right side, you can now see that we just triggered a change into the staging environment. And again, GitOps in action here, right? Single source of the truth. Jenkins X is doing exactly what it should be doing, which is doing a pull request on that environment. If you need to roll back, you could do that via simple git commands, right? And again, I think that the Canary Deployments workshop that I have helps you understand how you can do rollback more in that context. This is still possible just because everything is versioned in GitHub, so you're able to do that as well. So right now, what's happening is our staging environment is getting the newest version of the application. So that should be happening shortly. We should see a success message on the right side. And as soon as we do, we're going to browse to the URL of our staging environment, and we should see the typo fixed at that point, right? So I'm going to check the Q&A here. Yeah, Bitbucket. I'm going to say, can I answer? Yes, you can use Bitbucket. If you use Lighthouse, then you're able to use Bitbucket as the Git provider, Elizabeth. I hope that helps. Okay, so we're still waiting for the change to the global nav, the typo to be deployed into staging. Should take less than a minute now. Helm in action, as you can see. Every time you make a change to an application, whether you use Jenkins X or not, Helm versioning plays a big role in this, right? You can, based on the Helm chart version that's stored in Chart Museum, which we also use, by the way, to store your charts. That's where we say, all right, let's pull if you wanted to roll back, then we would pull the previous version of your Helm chart and then deploy it to the appropriate environment, okay? So apparently this is done. So let's take a look at our staging environment. Now, I'm just gonna click on the link here and the typo should be gone. There it is, it's gone. Very nice, but I'm not done yet. I actually want to deploy my change to production, right? This was staging. Now, if I do the same command here, I can see that version 72 is deployed to staging, and we saw it, but version production is out of date. It's you know, now on 69. And so I want to deploy my version of this application into production. So the way to do that is you go JX promote, and we're gonna give the app name as ski app. The version is exactly this version. I want to promote this version into our production environment. So I'll say that. And the environment I want to promote it to is production. That's it. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Now, what I'm going to show you here is I'm going to cancel on the top the monitoring of the staging environment repo, and I'm going to change this to production. Okay. And we want to monitor any changes to that environment. So I'm just going to clean that window up. As soon as there's something, oh, let's see. That doesn't seem right. It actually told me I did a typo, so that's correct. I put an extra S, so there we go. Now it's going to promote the application, and I see on the right side, I'm monitoring the production environment repository, GitOps based. Yeah, it's going to trigger a pull request in that production environment. You can see that it's pull request number 2. If I wanted to see that over in the GitHub UI, there it is. It's telling me that that 72 version application is being deployed via a PR. So that's great. And let's let that finish. As soon as that finishes, you should see some action on the top right terminal where it's telling us that the new version of the application is being deployed. So let's wait, hang tight for a second. I think I have some other questions. Does it have a GUI version to it? I'm not sure. Let's see. Sorry, I don't. I'm not sure what you're referring to there. CloudShift, yeah, CloudShift is being worked on, and we accept contributions, of course. Stepan, is there a visual representation of the delivery process available with Jenkins X to help all collaborators understand the delivery process? Do you mean contributing? I'm not sure what you mean there, but okay, so here we go. It looks like our change is being deployed to production at this point. You can see it in action. There's the pull request here is still running on the production environment. We should see our change deployed fairly shortly into our production environment, and then we'll click on the link to verify that the change actually happened, okay? Now, do you wish to use Jenkins bot? Yes, I want Jenkins X tells you, do you want to use your bot account as the account that triggers the pipeline and change in your production environment? And I answered yes, which is the default. So right now what it's doing is the PR succeeded. Now, if I go into our production environment URL, I don't see any changes yet. Notice how the global navigation does not have that option even, right? It's fairly outdated. It was, what, version 69. So what I'm expecting in a couple of seconds is that this process on the top right terminal finishes, the Helm version of the application is deployed, the latest one. And then when I actually refresh the page in our production environment, you see the change with the typo fixed, right? So that's what we're waiting for at this point. Let's take a look. So far so good. You know, I'm very thankful that GitHub degradation service issues got resolved before we have this webinar. Otherwise, I wouldn't be showing you this today. I might have improvised in a creative way, but glad that this worked out. And it's being recorded in case you need to rewatch it and kind of just walk through the whole process, right? I also have workshops that can help you understand end-to-end what, you know, canary deployments are, or just overall the platform itself, an introduction to it and whatnot. Okay, so it looks like this succeeded. The Helm chart got deployed. Now, I'm just gonna go back to here, the production environment URL. You can see that. I'm gonna hit refresh. And there is our change. Oh man, I missed skiing. So there it is. That's it. That was the demo today. You saw an end-to-end demo about CI/CD, GitOps in action, as well as infrastructure as code and whatnot. If there are any questions, please do ask now. Happy to respond to those now or later. Thanks for your attention.
Awesome.
Right.
Thanks, Oscar. In just our last couple of minutes, I did want to run through what CloudBees has to offer with Jenkins X. Obviously, everything that Oscar showed you today can be accomplished with the open source tool. So no worries there, but there may be some instances where some of the CloudBees services would be right for you. So the big exciting thing that we just launched this year, it's actually in preview now, so it's not GA yet, is CloudBees Cloud Native CI/CD. And this is Jenkins X, but hosted by CloudBees as a SaaS on Google Cloud. And so all the goodness that you get in Jenkins X, if you want to consume that as a SaaS, we now have an option for you to do that. If you'd like to join the preview experience, you can sign up for that on our website, and we would love to have you. So that is the first offering. And then just to kind of give you an overview of all of the things that there's to offer here. So we have the open source tool, of course, that's what you saw today. We also have a distribution. So this is also open source. It is the CloudBees branded stable release of Jenkins X. And what that means is that it's battle tested with an always current Kubernetes ecosystem. And we also offer support for it. So if you're in, you know, an enterprise situation where support for the products that you're using is a requirement, CJXD might be right for you. And then of course, we've got the free preview experience happening right now for CloudBees Cloud Native CI/CD. If you guys want to learn more, we have some resources here for you. We have a great getting started video demo. This one is Oscar as well. So if you enjoyed Oscar's presentation today, give this one a watch. We have a really great write-up by RedMonk, actually. James Governor came to our keynote at DevOps World, Jenkins World this last year, and did a really cool write-up on Jenkins X. We actually launched the SaaS solution there in Nice. So that one is a really great read. And then, of course, if you want to try it yourself, you can follow that link to the Jenkins X distribution. And just want to reiterate again, this is free. It is open source. So there's nothing paid there if you want to check that one out. With that, we'll just thank you guys for attending and talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone. We do have 1 minute, and we will be able to get to questions offline as well. But we had kind of touched on this. I just want to bring it back up to Oscar. So there was a follow-up. Delivery process is modeled by Jenkins X is sourced from a YAML representation. So everything, the current status is console or bot visualization. Is there a pipeline format visualization like what Jenkins does in Blue Ocean?
Yep. So I just responded to that, and we do have what we call the Jenkins X UI, where it's continuously being improved, but you can see status of pipelines and history logs of what happened if the pipeline failed, etc. So we do have that. It's a Helm chart that you add after installing Jenkins X. So it doesn't come automatically. You have to add it and deploy it as a typical Helm chart.
All right, great. We did not get to everything, but we will, of course, be able to do it offline, as I mentioned. In the meantime, we're at the top of the hour, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So I wanted to say thank you again to Kellyanne, Kristen, and Oscar for presenting. Thank you, of course, to all of you for joining and asking the questions. And we hope to talk to you again very soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks,
guys.
all.